Oh boy, time to play some Donkey Kong Land 2. Well, that's not good. So, this video probably was going to originally come out almost 2 years ago. I picked up a for repair game lot, mainly Game Boy Advance, although there was a Game Boy game, and then this action replay, I think, for the DS. And I had started to film footage for it and everything, starting with Donkey Kong Land 2, because at the time I didn't have a copy, and I thought, well, if I can fix this, it'd be a great affordable way to get a copy of it, because this entire lot cost me about $10. So I went ahead and took this apart and noticed some issues with the cartridge. Definitely had some problems inside, and if I have that footage, I'll superimpose it. But in the event that I don't, we'll go ahead and open this up so you can take a look. Now, this cartridge has already been worked on a little bit, so it's going to probably be different than what you might have expected. If you look at the back here, there is a bodge wire that I put in myself, but you may also notice some of these pads are missing. That's because this entire PCB was covered in some sort of substance, coke, something like that. I'm not sure. Let's see if I can get some better lighting or something. There, that's a little bit better. So, yeah, I mean, I even went so far as to replace the battery just in case that was the issue. I tried reflowing some of the solder on these chips. It didn't seem to make much of a difference. That's because it was just too much corrosion on it, and it's possible that there's some traces that are just completely gone. I mean, again, if you look at the pads, the only one that's intact is this one here. This one's pretty much gone. These two are mostly gone. So I was like, well, this is probably a little bit out of my scope for this one. I'll come back to it at some point later. Actually, there's a little bit of green, if you can see it on the inside of the cartridge shell. Doesn't matter. I ended up finding a copy anyway, so this just went on the back burner. I figured, well, maybe what I'll do one day is I'll be brave enough to actually remove all the chips, check the traces, and if I can't fix the board for whatever reason, maybe find an equivalent game, similar board, but like maybe one of those like undesirable games, and they just swap the chips out or order a new PCB. So I went ahead and decided to tackle one of the other ones, and let's take a look here at this Need for Speed Underground 2 for the Game Boy Advance. Now, the label is in very bad shape. I don't know if you can see it. It's like very, very, almost, I don't want to say moldy, but it's pretty close to it. But then I noticed something else about it. If you take a very, very close look at this Nintendo logo, something seems off about it, right? And the ESRB logo isn't quite printed right, and even the actual seal of approval, which I can't really get into focus. But even that is kind of odd. So I went ahead and was going to open it up to take a look. Figured maybe they replaced the label. Maybe the label was just so bad they replaced it. But they're so bad at keeping their games, that even this one kind of got messed up. So I went ahead and turned it around, and I noticed that there's a Phillips screw in here. That's not typical of Game Boy Advance games. In fact, if we look at this Namco Museum, Nintendo started using tri-wings on their Game Boy Advance games. Now, in the original Game Boy games, they were using the game bits, and they switched it to these probably because of size and cost savings and things like that. But again, it's possible that this person lost the original screw and decided, you know what, we'll just put this one in, it'll work. But I wanted to open it up anyway, and I'll do that for you now. And unfortunately, it's a fake. Yeah, this is definitely one of those generic boards that you could pick up and program your own ROMs and everything. So there's even a blob right there, and I'm guessing some sort of SRAM there. Not even sure. So that's a fake. It also has some corrosion and stuff. It could just be leftover flux, but there's some corrosion on the battery itself. So there's that. Next, I took a look at Monopoly, and this one looks like it's legitimate. In fact, I can't get the camera to focus, but right here, if you look carefully, there's a stamp in there. It looks like number 19, and then below it, there's another one. That's usually a sign that this is a legitimate cartridge. It also has the tri-wing screw in there, And the shell itself even just looks... Now, it's possible this one's slightly yellowed compared to this, but I mean, just if you look at the embossing on the font and everything on the fake one, it's just off. So this one should be legitimate. Let's open up and find out. And yeah, this one looks like an official Nintendo PCB. It does say Ninte Endo. There have been some more modern fakes that pretty much mimic this layout, but instead of it saying Nintendo, it says Ninfendo. I guess, they don't want to make things obvious or anything, So, yeah, let's take a look. Yeah, the PCB itself is almost definitely correct. It's almost definitely legitimate. So, and it's very basic too, because it's just a basic game, nothing fancy about it. But let's go ahead and take a look at the last one, Bionicle. And as soon as I look at that label, I'm like, yeah, that's a repro. Screw itself is also a Phillips screw. So, well, let's take a look inside anyway. The other thing about these repro cards is that they have these extra tabs, it seems, to snap in place that make it a little bit more difficult to open up. And yeah, another fake. In fact, it's the exact same PCB design as the other one, except without the long LV004 silk screening on it. Everything else seems to be a little bit different up here too. There's a resistor and some extra pads. But for the most part, it's the same thing. And yeah, so another fake. So that's neat. So title wasn't that clickbaity because, yes, it turns out that I did get scammed. Although I don't know if the Monopoly game works. I never got that far into testing it because I kind of was like, yeah, I'm just going to drop everything for now, visit everything later, and go from there. I did not contest it with the seller because... for the amount that I ended up winning the bid on, which was like $10, this would have been more than worth it, especially if I could have gotten it working. And since this turned out to be real, fine, whatever. Yeah, it sucks that these were fakes, but it is what it is. So what I was going to do then is decide to, well, like I said, I was going to scrap Donkey Kong Land 2 for now and revisit it later. And I was going to wait until I collected some potential fakes to release a video on how to kind of tell when you're getting a fake versus a legitimate cartridge. And I just, put it off. And I never actually got any of these carts because I just kind of forgot about it, to be honest. But over the holidays, I was watching a lot of videos, and there were a few of them that I noticed where people were going to these game shows and were worried about picking up games that were potentially fraudulent. And there was one, something like, did I get ripped off? And it was holding a game cartridge and it was a silhouette of a game cartridge. And turns out that it was a real cart and everything. And I was kind of hoping that it wasn't, so they could go through, well, this is how you try to tell, fake cartridge. And I remembered, hey, I've got some fakes. I should probably do a video going over all of this and how to try and tell. Now, mind you, I'm not an expert. These are just little tips and tricks that I picked up along the way. There's some really good fakes out there that I would probably not be able to tell myself necessarily. But I figured, I'd show you guys some examples. And again, it's going to vary from cartridge to cartridge. Like, on the original Game Boy games, they use the game bit. So if you see a cartridge without a game bit on there, chances are it's going to be a fake. Although, again, maybe they just lost a screw and wanted to put it back together with whatever they had. So what you may want to do is if you go buying games, especially if you're doing something like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, something where you meet in person, or even if you go to like a legitimate retro game store, they might not necessarily know either, whether they have a fake or not. So I do recommend taking with you game bit driver. There's a 3.8. There's a 4.5, I believe, which is typically used more for consoles, although I think the Sega Genesis cartridges use the larger one as well as taking a tri-wing bit with you, and maybe even just a Phillips just to be on the safe side. Like I said, maybe they just use whatever screw they had laying around in order to fix their cart. You can still open it up and find out if there's a legitimate PCB inside. So, of course, like I said, one of the ways is to look at the back of the screw. Game Boy Advance uses tri-wings. NES, SNES use the smaller game bit along with the Game Boy cartridges. Sega Genesis technically uses a wide variety, though most of them are going to use a larger game bit. EA games will use something similar to a spanner bit, which is like a screw head with two little dots inside. Theirs have like three, and you can use a spanner bit to open it up. The bit itself is kind of pricey. I think I found one on eBay for like $30. I said it wasn't worth it, so I made it work with a spanner bit. But you may see other games. I think later on in the Sega Genesis Mega Drive's lifespan, Sega started cost reducing everything, and they just started using, I think, Phillips screws. So, or even security Torx I've seen. So let's see. I also got the action replay for the DS. It does not work. I did force it open because these are molded together, and I was not able to really see anything. It's a little bit of discoloration on some of these pads. I tried cleaning them before. It didn't help any. I don't know much about these. Looks like there's some sort of a cable. I'm guessing you would connect it to a computer to upload codes or something like that. One day I'll revisit that. But this is definitely not a knockoff. It's a real one. It's just missing the label and stuff. So, yeah, so screws, obviously look at the label. Again, that's not an indicator that it's a fake cartridge. They could have reprinted the label because the old one had problems or what have you, although they should not be selling it as an original card anymore. You should at least get a discount. But ultimately, you're going to have to open it up and look. And if you see this PCB, it's definitely a fake. This one here, the Monopoly gun, was a real one. And we can even open up the Namco Museum so you take a look at that one. So here's Namco Museum. Very, very, very similar, if not identical, to the Monopoly one. So that's kind of how you'll know. Still, again, there's some really good fakes coming out there with, almost identical designs for the PCBs. But for the most part, you should be able to tell like that. And obviously, if you're never sure, if you have any, gut feeling or anything, don't buy it. It might be a really good deal for a reason. So don't let your FOMO, rip you off or anything like that. Yeah, again, it's not all encompassing. It's not, necessarily 100% verifiable proof. Oh, something else I just realized here is the fake cartridges don't have any beveling or chamfering to them, unlike the real cartridge does, which will put less strain on the cartridge slot. So something else to keep an eye out for. Plus, all of Nintendo's legitimate games will have gold connectors, whereas the fake ones might be gold, but typically they'll be tin or something similar to that kind of metal. So basically they look silverish. But of course, just because they're knockoffs doesn't mean that they don't work. First, though, we'll test the legitimate Monopoly cartridge, see if it works or not. Nintendo logo. Everything seems fine. Licensed by Nintendo. Looks like it's got a long intro. And it works, so that's good to know. So at least this one doesn't need any repair. Let's take a look at some of these fakes. First, we'll take a look at Bionicle. I think it's Bionicle. I hope we'll put the PCBs in the right spots. Oh. Oh, that's definitely not inserted correctly. Maybe I do have to screw it back together. Nope, okay. Oh, that's interesting. It's like the DS screen, licensed by Nintendo. Eidos. Oh my god. But yeah, it seems to work just fine. I know nothing about it. I think it's a fighting game. But whatever, let's go ahead and take a look at the Need for Speed game. Alright, we'll try Need for Speed Underground. Oh, no Nintendo logo. It's not reading the cartridge correctly. Nope. So this might not actually work. All right, give it a little bit of a cleaning. Let's find out. Oh, there we go. So even these knockoffs are in fact working. So yeah, good enough. Now, I can't necessarily blame the seller for selling me fake games. They may not have known. They just probably bought themselves a game lot, tried to get them to work, didn't. They might not even known about cleaning them or anything like that. So it's hard to say. Plus, at this point, it's almost 2 years. I can't get a refund anymore anyway. So, but let's go back to this Donkey Kong Land 2. Now, since two of the games were fakes, how do we know that this one's actually real? Yeah, it looks like it's a real shell, had a game bit screw. Looks like an official Nintendo PCB, albeit a little messed up. Well, I mean, like I said, I do have a copy of it myself. So let's open up and compare. Now, the other thing that I did notice too is that the for repair one is a player's choice version, as this Nintendo seal quality is different, plus the ESRB logo is different, whereas the original one is doesn't have the seal of approval, though this is a legit cart. It's got K to A instead of E for everyone, which makes sense because they did change that at some point. The other thing I noticed is that this one has the Super Game Boy logo, whereas this one does not, even though they both should be Super Game Boy compatible. Anyway, there's the inside of the legitimate one, and if we compare that with the fake, or the for repair one, they're pretty much identical. Now, something I didn't notice though on the for repair one, looks like there's a diode missing. If that is in fact a diode, and it looks like it might be. So this one's missing 2 diodes. Actually, it's missing quite a bit of components. Although these pads are untouched, so there never was anything on there anyway. Possibly these are designed for Super Game Boy in order to prevent anything maybe from filtering back to the Super Nintendo that shouldn't, or vice versa. And maybe that's why they don't have the Super Game Boy logo on there anymore, is because this technically isn't compatible anymore. But I'm wondering, I don't have diodes or resistors or capacitors and like that. That's small. Wouldn't be able to test it anyway. But it's possible. I mean, though again, I find it hard to believe this would have left the factory and just not work. Someone would have bought it at some point, realized, hey, this doesn't work, returned it, and that's it. But as far as the PCBs themselves, DMG DECN 20 versus 02. But again, that's kind of a Nintendo designation. And again, if we look at the back, this does have the Nintendo logo on there. And pretty sure this one does too. Yeah. So it is a legitimate cartridge. It just doesn't work because of the fact that it's got some issues. Like I said, if I can still find the old footage, I'll show you what it looked like before I tried to mess with it a little bit. So did I get scammed? Well, I suppose it depends on your perspective. Like I said, I paid about $10 for the game lot. Donkey Kong Land 2, I think it's a $20 game, $15 to $20 game, if I could have gotten it working. Monopoly itself is an $8 game loose. So pretty technically I got scammed, but I didn't. Like I said, I can't say for sure because it's possible that the seller just didn't know. Odds are they did, but I'm not going to, make any accusations, especially after almost 2 years. So I'm just going to say they didn't know, and that's it. But if I can get the Donkey Kong Land 2 game working as well, then I've definitely made out. So, I mean, what do you guys think of this video? Did you find it informative? Am I missing any information? Did I get something wrong? Should I see what I can do with these fakes? Should I attempt to repair Donkey Kong Land 2, the one that is damaged, the player's choice version? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, thanks all, and I will catch you later.